What most Americans are missing about the transportation emergency unfolding across the United States right now is that when Donald Trump publicly requested $540 billion in Canadian railway assistance yesterday, he was not proposing continental cooperation, he was begging for rescue from American infrastructure collapse. And when Mark Carney's response went viral within hours, generating more global attention than any transportation summit in modern history, it did not simply decline American demands. It offered to solve America's railway crisis through Canadian operational control of American infrastructure, exposing the institutional breakdown of American transportation systems in the most humiliating terms imaginable. The shockwaves moving through American transportation networks tonight are not just about delayed freight shipments or failing passenger services, though both problems are becoming catastrophic for American economic survival. They are about the sudden recognition that the world's largest economy has allowed its transportation infrastructure to deteriorate so completely that a smaller neighbor is now offering to run American railways because American institutions have proven fundamentally incapable of operating them effectively. We've spent decades analyzing American institutional frameworks that assumed domestic infrastructure problems could be solved through domestic solutions, with international partnerships providing supplemental support rather than operational takeover, and what we are witnessing now represents the complete destruction of that assumption. American transportation policy has become so dysfunctional that Canadian management is not just an option anymore, it is a necessity that American incompetence has made strategically inevitable. The railway crisis currently devastating American freight and passenger transportation is not simply about aging tracks or maintenance failures, though both problems are catastrophic. It is about the end of American assumptions that transportation policy is a domestic issue manageable through domestic institutions. And Donald Trump's desperate plea for Canadian railway rescue reveals just how completely those assumptions have shattered. Let us explain what actually happened here, because the surface narrative completely misses the profound infrastructure dependency this moment exposes for American transportation strategy. And once you understand why Donald Trump was forced to request over $540 billion in railway assistance from Canada, and why Mark Carney's counterproposal was so strategically devastating, you will see why this decision marks the beginning of a transportation catastrophe that American institutions are fundamentally incapable of addressing. The official explanation sounds almost reasonable until you examine the context. Facing unprecedented strain on American freight railways, collapsing passenger rail networks, and mounting economic pressure from transportation bottlenecks threatening supply chain functionality, Donald Trump proposed what his administration called a Continental Railway Security Partnership with Canada. The framework would provide American railways with access to Canadian rail technology, Canadian logistics expertise, and Canadian transportation financing at rates significantly below international market costs. The deal was structured as emergency infrastructure assistance worth approximately $540 billion over 10 years, essentially treating Canadian railway capacity as a rescue mechanism for American transportation policy failure. From Donald Trump's perspective, this represented American leadership solving an American crisis through neighborly cooperation, and the logic was familiar. Canada benefits from American economic relationships, so pressure applied correctly would secure railway assistance that American transportation infrastructure desperately requires at prices American institutions can actually afford. The problem with that logic is that it assumes Canadian railway capacity exists primarily to solve American transportation failures rather than serve Canadian economic objectives. It assumes Canadian rail resources are available for American consumption regardless of Canadian transportation priorities. And most catastrophically, it assumes Canada has any obligation to subsidize the failures of American infrastructure policy through below-market transportation assistance. When Mark Carney was questioned about Donald Trump's railway bailout request during a transportation conference in Montreal, his response was so direct and so strategically devastating that it immediately went viral across international infrastructure communities. He did not engage with the specifics of American railway needs, and he did not offer modified terms or suggest alternative transportation arrangements. Instead, he announced that Canada was prepared to address American railway dysfunction through a comprehensive infrastructure management partnership that would place Canadian National Railway and Canadian Pacific Railway in operational control of key American freight corridors, with Canadian transportation expertise managing American passenger rail systems that American institutions had proven incapable of operating effectively. Then came the moment that broke the internet and shocked transportation experts worldwide. When asked whether this represented Canadian annexation of American infrastructure, Mark Carney delivered what may be the most devastating assessment any Allied leader has ever made of American institutional competence. This is not annexation, this is professional management of critical infrastructure that requires institutional competence rather than political theater. The phrase professional management has been viewed over 70 million times in the past 12 hours and has been translated into dozens of languages, analyzed by infrastructure and economic policy experts around the world, and turned into diplomatic messaging that every serious infrastructure economy is studying for its implications about the future of American institutional credibility. But the viral moment was not just about transportation policy. It was about the institutional sophistication that made such confident infrastructure management offers possible. You do not propose managing $540 billion worth of foreign infrastructure unless you have $540 billion worth of superior operational capacity already demonstrated. And Canada had been building that capacity for years while American attention was focused elsewhere. Canadian National Railway, operating as one of the most efficient freight transportation systems in North America, has been demonstrating operational excellence that American freight railways have been unable to match despite decades of deregulation and private investment. Canadian Pacific Railway has maintained service, reliability, and infrastructure quality that American railways abandoned in pursuit of short-term profit maximization. Canadian passenger rail systems, while modest compared to European standards, operate with on-time performance and service quality that American Amtrak systems have never achieved despite billions in federal subsidies and repeated reform efforts. Canadian transportation planning operates under institutional frameworks that prioritize long-term infrastructure development over short-term political considerations. Canadian rail technology development, supported by government investment and private sector innovation, has created transportation solutions that American railways need but cannot develop due to institutional dysfunction and regulatory complexity that prevents long-term infrastructure planning. In other words, while American transportation policy was focused on deregulation and crisis management, Canada was building institutional transportation capacity based on operational excellence, long-term planning, and sustainable infrastructure development. When that capacity matured, American transportation dependency became strategically irrelevant. The impact of Mark Carney's railway management offer has exposed deep problems in American transportation that many are only beginning to grasp. U.S. freight railways that focus on cutting costs, deferring maintenance, and prioritizing shareholder returns now look weak when compared directly with Canadian operational standards. When Canadian efficiency is placed side by side with American delays and service issues, the contrast is impossible to ignore. This is not just an operational failure, it is an institutional one. The situation highlights how American transportation systems have become trapped in political decision-making rather than professional management. Canadian officials, by contrast, have spent years building logistics expertise, modern railway technology, and management systems designed for efficiency instead of optics. Their offer was not an emergency reaction, it was a deliberate demonstration of institutional strength. Mark Carney's move reframed continental infrastructure cooperation. Rather than positioning Canada as a backup during US failures, it presented Canadian management as a superior alternative. That message resonates far beyond North America. When a middle power country can credibly offer to manage critical infrastructure for the world's largest economy, it forces a global reassessment of American institutional capacity. The deeper lesson is clear. Restoring U.S. transportation leadership requires rebuilding competence, not symbolism. Infrastructure success depends on long-term investment, professional management, and operational excellence, not national pride or political theater.